me. It's not one I've given before. So we'll see how it goes. And just a little bit first on where I came from. I have a background in astronomical instrumentation. So I've built a lot of instruments for telescopes, usually things that have never been built before, looking at colliding galaxies, using infrared instrumentation, cryogenic stuff. And then I shifted to testing general relativity by shooting a laser at the moon and measuring millimeter accuracy between Earth and moon to map the shape of the moon's orbit, because the shape of the moon's orbit tells you something about how gravity works. And at the millimeter scale, you're really proving general relativity better than any other available test. In the process, because I'm shooting a laser at the moon, which you can see in this picture, during an eclipse, it's the only time you can actually see the laser and the moon, because the moon is so bright, it just saturates any picture unless it's eclipsed. Shooting lasers through the sky risks hitting an airplane, which nobody wants to do. And so I actually invented this airplane detector that worked really well. And so now it's employed in a lot of the biggest observatories around the world, who also do laser work for different purposes. But so I'm kind of a technologist. I've built things, but in parallel, I taught this energy and environment course at UC San Diego starting in 2004. And because I'm a hands-on person, I like to build things. I thought I need to get to know this field better. I need to understand solar better, because solar is obviously an important technology. And so I built my own little system that started small, just powering a TV, and then, hey, let's do the refrigerator, let's do the living room lights, let's expand and expand, explore different charge controller technologies and different battery technologies, and wrote an article in Physics Today in 2008, trying to get more people doing experimentation like I was, so they would get intimately familiar with what the trade-offs are. As Tim mentioned, I started this blog called Do the Math in 2011, and it started out basically as a quantitative exploration of all the different energy alternatives to fossil fuels, recognizing that we have to get off fossil fuels. And so what can we do? How much can you get from tidal energy or geothermal, or from ocean currents, and just how much pumped hydro? What are the limits? And in parallel to that, I did a lot of home experiments just in what can you do on the reduction side, which is actually quite a lot. I mean, factors of 4 are not actually that hard. Looking at efficiencies, thermal properties of my home, all kinds of things in that nature. So that's kind of my trajectory into this space. One of the big motivating factors was this plot, or plots like it. I saw something like this in a textbook that showed the history of energy use by humans, and in the context of fossil fuels, which is basically the entire story up until now, quantitatively. We know that fossil fuels have to look like this. It's a pulse, it spikes and it goes back down. It's a finite resource, deal with it. That's what it does. What happens next? I mean, I labeled the left side muscle and firewood. That's where we got our energy before. Heating and cooking, and also animal and human muscle labor. Does that mean that's what comes after? That's kind of, there's a symmetry here in this plot that at least makes us want to ask that question. And so that's one context, is what comes after. Or do we find some renewable energy thing to sort of keep us at the peak into the distant future? So also aware that there's this inevitable collision between our growth paradigm in our modern society and the finite planet. So those two can't coexist long term. And I'll take you through a little bit of this in a few minutes. But if you continue our energy growth rate, our historical rate that's been present for centuries, we would be using the entire Milky Way galaxy output, all stars, all 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, in a short 2,500 years. And I say short because on a civilization timescale, that's short. It's also true that it takes light 100,000 years to cross the galaxy. So physics says no, not going to happen. We're not going to continue that growth rate. It's just physically impossible. There's also, you can play games with thermodynamics. If we kept increasing our energy use on Earth, within 400 years, we're boiling the oceans. So obviously, no, right? These things aren't going to happen. So this is, from a physicist's point of view, you can put hard limits on what we're not going to keep doing. Big changes are in store. My default assumption going in is that renewable energy provides a lot of options. There's a huge list of possible technologies that, I thought, well, we hit this peak, but so what? We continue in some way. Just a little bit more on this exponential business that I like to use 2.3% per year because it's historically, roughly, it's a reasonable rate. And it also mathematically is convenient because it's a factor of 10 per century. And now I can think about it without calculator. And we currently in the world use 18 terawatts of industrial power. That would grow at a factor of 10 per century to all the sunlight striking the Earth in 400 years. We have a 10,000 excess. 10,000 times more solar energy hits the Earth than we use in our society, and that gives a lot of people hope because solar potential is gigantic. That 10 to the 4 means 4 centuries because it's a factor of 10 per century. It takes another 1,000 years to reach the output from the entire sun if you were to somehow surround the sun. Don't ask me where you get the materials to do that. That takes another 1,000 years. And then 100 billion stars, 10 to the 11 stars, that's just 11 more centuries. And as I said, light takes much longer than that to cross the Milky Way, so it ain't gonna happen. On the thermodynamic side, the only way that heat leaves the planet, it can't conduct off, it can't convect off, it doesn't evaporatively cool, it's radiation. And right now, our 18 terawatts spread over the globe is about 0.1 watts per square meter. Now, you might have heard about radiative forcing in the context of global warming, and that's at about 1 watt per square meter. That's the excess radiative forcing right now from CO2. So it's about a tenth of that scale, and right now it's not a major concern. If you were to grow at a factor of 10 per year, however, in 100 years, you're comparable to the current climate change situation. In 200 years, you're 10 times larger. And by 400 years, you actually reach boiling temperatures. And I should point out that this is even if you have fusion or something we don't even know the name for yet. It obeys thermodynamics. And so you have limits. It's just the physics. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of context, give you some context in the realms of space and time and energy and a little bit of ecology, just to kind of ground where we are. I put an empty slide here because that's what space is. You often see representations like this in textbooks showing the planets, and no. So the correct scale would have Earth, would have this thing stretched out 300,000 times the Earth diameter. So this is what, about 10 centimeters. So we're talking about 30 kilometers, which I live in Squim across the water on the Olympic Peninsula. That's about how far it is. And you can't graphically represent that, whether you're using pixels or ink. It's just, it's a blank page. You don't even notice the planets. So the way I like to think about this is, if you scale the sun to a grain of sand, 1 millimeter, that's something you can visualize very easily, very bright in this 1 millimeter. The solar system is something like the size of a bedroom, smaller than this room, but kind of bedroom size. And 99.85% of the mass is in that sand grain. And even Jupiter, mighty Jupiter, claims 2/3 of the remaining mass, and the other gas giants basically scoop up what's left. Earth, and by the way, Jupiter is about the diameter of human hair in this bedroom. So you're not even going to notice it. Earth is a bacterium size, you can't even see it. Humans have never traveled more than 0.3 millimeters away from Earth on this scale. And since 1972, not even a micron. So just really hugging the surface, just on the skin. Mars, meanwhile, is 600 times farther than the moon on average. So, you know, we can all talk about Mars, but the moon is hard. Mars is 600 times farther. The next star, meanwhile, in this scale model is 30 kilometers away. So forget it. The solar system itself is empty. I like to think of whenever I wipe off my laptop screen now, it's got dust particles on it, and there's still some left. There is more dust left on my laptop after I clean it than in this bedroom-sized solar system. So even the solar system is super empty, and interstellar space more so, intergalactic space even more so. A lot of empty there. Okay, addressing really quick the idea of colonizing Mars or the moon. To me, it's just fantasy. I mean, it's just almost childish to think of. I would believe it. I would have an easier time believing it if these various things were true, if we had a demonstration of a self-sustained biosphere, even on the Earth, with Home Depot next to you so you can build whatever you want. We can't do that. We haven't demonstrated even that on the Earth. It'd be easier to believe if the space station didn't have to import all its oxygen from the ground. That's really expensive. To transport anything into Earth orbit, it's very expensive. And the fact that there's not an air scrubbing thing to like replenish the oxygen tells you that is a hard problem. It's easier to launch stuff from the surface of the Earth. It's really hard. I would find it easier to believe if we had first colonized Mount Everest or the ocean floors. Far easier to access. Safety is easy to get to in case of an emergency, comparatively. Food, if you're on the ocean floor, scuttling by you, you know, that's not going to happen in space. The closest restaurant is still back on Earth. So also radiation is about 100 times higher outside of the Earth's magnetosphere. We're really shielded here. And so if you were to inhabit Mars, you'd have to basically be in underground caves. And imagine the irony. You thought you were going to be a spaceman, now you're a caveman. You know, it would have to be a bit of a letdown. So, and this plot just shows different atmospheres in the solar system. And I drew a box around Earth that's the conceivably sort of hospitable range of temperatures and pressures. Mount Everest is just outside of it, but the other planets are just nowhere close. So another sort of planetary trick that you can play is ask how much you would pay at current market prices for materials for a planet. So a barren planet would cost something like $10 to $20 just for the materials, delivery costs extra. We are not just a barren planet. We have an evolved, mature, very complex, interconnected ecosystem that took billions of years to get where it is, which it's not, by the way, we're not the pinnacle of that process. We're just part of that long story. And so that has to raise the price. Orders of magnitude. So let's, I don't know, say 10 to the 24. We can't even fully understand complex ecosystems. We couldn't possibly recreate it using our own intellect. So really, maybe it's pointless to put a price on it. It's priceless. It's just beyond our capability. Just a little tidbit. If you took all life on Earth, plants, animals, everything, oceans, land, and compressed it to a uniform layer, and don't dry it out to dry carbon, but just, you know, the wet mass, it's 4 millimeters thick. So it's thin. It's fragile, it's tiny, and precious. So all of this can be compared to the gross world product of 10 to the $14, $100 trillion a year. And this is so many orders of magnitude different that sure, there are flaws in this kind of crude analysis, but anytime you get something that disparate, there's something to it. And so we make almost all our decisions on financial terms, and it's really the wrong metric. It's really skewed. And it doesn't, maybe I should have said misses by kilometers, because I forgot that it would be crossing into a different unit system. Okay, so time, a little perspective on time. I want to compare for you our civilization to our crazy old uncle's new hobby. So the universe, first of all, is 13.8 billion years old. Humans have inhabited Earth for 2.5 to 3 million years. That's about a 5,000th the age of the universe. In a day, if the universe is a day old, humans have been on the planet for the last 20 seconds. So it's a very recent phenomenon. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and compare this 2.5 to 3 million years that humans have been on the planet, not just Homo sapiens, but all human species, to a typical 75-year lifespan, because we do have some intuition. That's kind of the longest span we have direct intuition about, roughly speaking. So Homo sapiens has been around for just the last 5 years of this 75-year span. Civilization, by which I mean agriculture, settlement, cities, and then all the rest, it's 10,000 years old. That's just the last 15 weeks of this uncle's life. It's very recent. It's a whole new pick. It's unlike anything. The behaviors are different. Everything's different. By the way, I think of it as about control. We try to control our food sources. We try to control our environment, control nature, domesticate animals. Science has only been around for the last 4 days in this lifetime. So it puts this control on steroids. It's how do we do a better job at this control? That's really kind of the bottom line. And then fossil fuels amp this up, gave us superpowers. And I kind of like to think of it as your uncle picked up marijuana and started doing that. Behaviors changed, who we hang out with changed, and then jumped up to cocaine 4 days ago. And now it's really ramped up. And now on PCP, thinks he has superpowers to fly out windows. That's what fossil fuels have done for us. But we're going to run out. And so the thing to point out is that in this temporal perspective, what we're doing is extremely new, completely untested. We're in uncharted territory. We also see it causing substantial damage, and I'll get more into that. And I went through the drug sequence. If your uncle actually went through this, you'd want him sedated, strapped to a bed in a hospital for a close observation. That's what we've brought ourselves to here. Okay, so just a quick recap so far. We occupy an unfathomably tiny slice of space. And even though Earth in this, microbe-sized speck in a bedroom solar system, the layer of life on even that is unbelievably thin. And we're pretty much alone as far as we know in this emptiness. And even if we're not, the emptiness makes us alone. So the time span that we've occupied is also incredibly short, and our lifetimes are incredibly short in this saga. And it's kind of like a fireworks show. It's very spectacular, but it's really too fast for evolution to have tracked. So other species are not adapting to our sudden new experiment. So let's talk about energy. I already showed you kind of the absurdity of continued physical growth, that you can't just keep growing physical energy, you run into physics limits. And even though I put some of those limits at a few hundred years, likely it's actually within this century where we're going to see, practically speaking, an end to growth in physical terms. the surprising thing to a lot of people is that economic growth also has to end when physical growth, maybe not at the same day, but it has to end, because think about it for a second. If you wanted to preserve economic growth after having stabilized your physical footprint, even if that's possible, I mean, that comes with all kinds of other costs. But let's just say that you could stabilize your energy usage. If you want economic growth to keep going, you basically have a smaller fraction. Physical goods would occupy an ever decreasing share of the economic activity as this thing kept soaring up, as economics kept soaring up. So your annual pay would mostly go to non-physical things, meaning that you would pay a smaller fraction of your annual salary toward physical goods, energy, materials, food. But that's really kind of senseless. Supply and demand will keep that from happening. If you have a finite, limited, but essential commodity, you're never going to see that become arbitrarily cheap. So that puts a self-termination cap on economic growth. It can't just soar off into la la land when the basis that the essentials can't grow also. I wrote a recent comment in Nature Physics on that. So let me just give you a tour of a hockey stick gallery. So hockey stick meaning a plot that abruptly turns up and it looks like the shape of a hockey stick. Do I have to explain to anybody in Canada what a hockey is? In America, I might. So I'm going to show a series of plots that goes the same 1,200 years. So human population, no surprise, we all know that it's done this. It's really shot up in the last century or so. And really, I'll just point out that this is fossil fuels. This is the Green Revolution. This is fertilizer and mechanized agriculture that's allowed such prolific food production, therefore population. Global energy use in all forms also looks like a hockey stick. Now, when both things look like a hockey stick, you could say, well, maybe it's just per capita is staying the same and it's all just driven by population. But per capita energy use also looks like a hockey stick. And it's not surprising, really. Do you use more energy in your daily life than your ancient ancestors? Of course. So gross world product, also an alarming hockey stick. And again, it's not just slave to population, because gross world product per capita also is a hockey stick. Materials, I use copper as a proxy. Materials extraction from the earth, it's a hockey stick. Per capita, it's also a hockey stick. I didn't bother showing that one. CO2, this is why a lot of people even know about hockey sticks, because CO2 has risen like a hockey stick. It's just a reflection of fossil fuel usage. And it's also much faster than human population. So even per capita, it's a hockey stick. Waste, I just use plastic as an easy thing I could get the numbers for. Looks like a hockey stick. So how much stuff we're discarding looks like a hockey stick. And now we start to get into some ecology. Extinction rates of animals look like hockey sticks. The background is 0.1 extinctions per year. And we're about 1,000 times higher. Amphibians are getting even worse. This is, notice, happening well before CO2 and climate change impacts, which don't make it any better for extinction rates. But this is a longer story. Okay, now let's look at some inverse hockey sticks. The things that we actually like, how are they doing? Forest cover, used to be 57% of land from time immemorial. It's now dropping rapidly. If you look at old growth forest, original forest, it's even more precipitous. It's down lower now, it's only 7%, 9% now. The mass of land mammals, how many gigatons of carbon or megatons in this case, are in land mammals over time. And look at what it's doing. And this is year 2000, where this data point is. This is 2100. This graph, not the graph is reality, the graph is 0 in 2050.
Are you including humans in that?
No, this is wild mammals. Yeah,
Wild mammals?
yeah, wild mammals.
You said land mammals.
I'm sorry, yeah, I should not have made that. Listen, here's the number right now. So only 4% of mammal mass on Earth is wild. 36% is human, 60% is livestock, 2% is land mammals, 2% is marine mammals. But in absolute terms, I mean, the total mammal mass has grown because human population is dominant and the livestock. But in absolute terms, the wild mammal mass has blown off a cliff. I don't like that. Also, just in my lifetime, I was born in 1970. The average decline in vertebrate population, studies that have tracked 20,000 vertebrate populations, see an average decline of 70% since 1970. So basically, we've got our knee on the throat of wildlife, and it's saying we can't breathe. But we're not listening, we're not hearing it. We're too consumed in other bits of news. So these hockey sticks, these celebrated metrics that track human activity, tend to be hockey sticks, but it comes at the expense of ecosystem health. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. We have deforestation, habitat loss, mining impacts, agricultural soil erosion, desertification, fisheries collapses, pollution, climate change. And I could have made the list a lot longer. You can come up with your own as well. The squirrels, it turns out, don't have any money, and they can't convince a developer not to bulldoze their forest. The fragmented habitat now makes, by the way, migration more difficult. So as climate changes, and animals might want to migrate to follow it, they can't. They're locked off. They're blocked, and so that just makes it worse. It's all very rapidly. This is just this 50-year dive is the last 12 hours of our 75-year-old uncle's life, destroying his habitat in the last 12 hours of his life. So let me just talk in general about what happens to hockey sticks. They look exponential, but we know exponentials can't last. Physical exponentials can't last. So you have two basic choices. You can level out, kind of what's called an S-curve, or you can fall back down. Those are really your two options. So non-renewable resources have to fall back down. The area under the curve is finite. You can't just level off and use the same amount forever. Doesn't happen. So fossil fuels, even materials, things that we mine, copper, have to do that. Human population, we should recognize, is deeply dependent on fossil fuels for fertilizer and agricultural practices. So waning fossil fuels suggests some agricultural reduction, which suggests a population reduction, because it's just kind of a one-to-one. A common response, and I'll address this in a little bit, is kind of a faith that some technology will come in and allow us to keep going. But I want you to keep in mind that the impressive track record that we've built up over the last few centuries has been in the context of abundant, one-time resource of fossil fuels. And we don't have a demonstration that we can do a different mode. So now that's the things that have to fall back down. Renewables, in principle, could level off for the long term, but only if they're not dependent on non-renewable resources, because those things go back down. And also they have to be at a scale that doesn't exceed the ecosystem's ability to support it. So for instance, firewood you can consider to be renewable, but not if you use it at a rate that cuts forests down faster than they grow back. That's what I mean by that. There's a limit to how fast you can use these things, even if they're renewable. Renewable is not inexhaustible. So that's the point. So is renewable energy the cure? And this is how I came into it, believing that was true. So I'm starting to ask myself, what is it that renewable energy aims to do? It's trying to address the CO2 emissions and the failing of fossil fuels, the finite fossil fuels, while keeping us fully powered and uninterrupted. That seems to be the goal, is to maintain civilization as we know it, because that's what we want, that's what we do. But it was kind of alarming to me to realize that the material demands per energy unit produced can go up in order of magnitude when you go from fossil fuels to the renewable technologies, because you're gathering a fairly diffuse energy resource, and you need a lot of stuff to make that happen. And so basically, you step up the assault on ecosystems because you get that stuff from the earth, and that comes at a cost. We continue to squeeze the wild things, maybe even faster. Just so, and copper is not a huge piece of the solar stack, but if you were to replace our fossil fuel habit with solar, you would have to step up the copper production on Earth by a factor of 10. I'm going to guess that we're already kind of maxed out, and it's hard to even find the copper now that we want. So 10 times higher, you know, what do the squirrels think of that? Maybe we should ask. So that's what this comes to, is that if wild mammals could vote, would they want us to succeed in this renewable energy transition? And they would say, well, are you kidding me? You know, you think this is, your train is going to a good place? So we have to ask, what have we used energy to do? We've used it to expand the human enterprise. We've used it to clear land and forests and mine materials. And, you know, the ecosystems have paid dearly for that. You might say, well, good thing that mammals are only 4% of the vote. We can get our cows to vote for us, surely. It's not all about us, though. This is a fascinating plot that shows all life on Earth by biomass. Humans are right here, our livestock here, wild mammals are here. That's where I got those numbers that I was presenting. If we extend the vote to all vertebrates, now we're drowned out. I mean, we just don't have the votes anymore. If you throw in plant life, that's so huge. We basically have lost our claim on a mandate. So the irony is that if we ignore this vote of the natural world, it actually leads to a bad end for us too, because we can't survive on this planet without the natural world. And one way to think about it is, would you sell all animals on Earth for all the gold or money on Earth? And obviously no, because you can't survive without the animals on Earth. So we're not in this alone. We need a healthy ecosystem. If we don't have that, if we don't start with that, then, you know, best of luck to you. So, so that's why I've come around to thinking that's incredibly important. And I would say that we need to develop a larger perspective. We have, as a culture, this this faith in innovation and technology that we can solve all the problems that come our way. And granted, we've had this incredible run. I'm impressed. I mean, what we can do is pretty amazing, but it is based on a tiny time slice during which we are spinning a one-time inheritance of fossil fuels extremely rapidly. This is the fireworks show. So don't base your faith in this most anomalous period. You need to step back, I think, and see that that's just the last few days in the 75-year life, and it's unsustainable. It's patently unsustainable. So also, our 75-year-old has lived about 27,000 days, hasn't died even once. And so you could understand why the conclusion might be, I'm immortal, I'll never die, because so far so good. But we all understand that there are real limits. There are fundamental issues that we can't brush aside. So I encourage people to step back a little bit and think about where we are, how we got here. If you're familiar with the children's book, Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus, this pigeon wants desperately to drive the bus, but we all know that's a bad idea. Market forces, that's the pigeon, don't have our best long-term interests at heart. They really just don't. We need to resist these shallow drivers. We wouldn't allow a toddler to decide what we do for a living, where we live, the rules of the house, because it's ice cream for dinner every night, writing on the walls, why not? Why leave such important matters that are really long-term existential matters to markets? I mean, I've already shown you how woefully inadequate financial valuations are for things that really matter, like ecosystems. So we can't leave the decisions, important decisions, to money. Success is going to require enough people asking, why are we doing what we're doing? Where are we going? Where do we think this is going? You know, where could it even go? So to what end? So we've never needed to ask this question before. It's new. It's new to humans. I don't know if we can. Let's try. But we've always just sort of happy-go-lucky stepped into the next advantage that we found. There's a game theory to it that anything that confers an advantage, we're gonna keep doing, and we're gonna amp it up. We haven't had to think about long-term sustainability, so it's no surprise that we don't have a sustainable system. Okay, so this is a set of useful questions to ask about any effort, and I've underlined and put effort in blue, so you can substitute anything you want into that blue underlined thing. So could this practice persist for the long haul? You can decide for yourself what you think is important for the long haul. Is it 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years? Does it therefore contribute to ultimate success or ultimate failure? Because I would argue that if it doesn't contribute to, if it can't persist for the long haul, then it's probably accelerating our failure rather than promoting our ultimate success. So also, does this activity benefit only or primarily the human species? Because watch out there, that's how they get you. And is it only short term? Those are warning signs. And does this activity treat other species at least as well as it treats humans? I think that's a nice metric to think about. Because again, if it's not, it's too greedy and it's likely a failure mode. Does this action prop up current harmful practices, unsustainable practices? So does it continue our consumers' behaviors, our comforts? Does it have negative ecosystem impacts? And, you know, one clue is if this practice dovetails into current practices, it's likely a net harm to the thing that matters most, which is a healthy and functioning ecosystem. So that's almost everything we do dovetails into our current system, because that's easy and it's where the money is. Don't be afraid. You should be more afraid of not having a radical change than having a radical change, because in our expectations, how we live on this planet, because the current path is this more scary one to me after having looked into it. And I'll end by just letting you know a little bit about my own reaction to this perspective, which is that it's definitely changed how I move through the world. I'm leaving astrophysics research. It's been really fun. It's challenging. It's got a lot of rewards, but in the end, I feel like it's kind of an empty ride. It's what good is it doing? And if we get everything else wrong, who's going to even know about it? You know, in a few hundred years. So that kind of takes the fun out of it a little bit. So I'm taking my foot off the gas pedal. So I've vastly reduced the energy consumption that I, you know, compared to my previous modes. I wouldn't say I'm all the way there, but nor do I think I need to be. I've at least learned that a lot is possible. I wrote this open access textbook that Tim mentioned, that it's freely available, PDF. You should be able to find it. And I co-initiated, as Tim mentioned, this Planetary Limits academic network, where, believe it or not, there are a number of academics who have come to fairly similar conclusions from the humanities, from social sciences, from, you know, religious studies, from engineering. And so we were finding each other. And it's really been great because, you know, it's a pretty lonely viewpoint. And to find out that other people have come to similar conclusions from a completely different direction. There's something that feels like, okay, there's something to this, you know. We're not crazy. Or if we're crazy in the same way, which is, I guess, what misery loves company. So I'm also engaged in outreach efforts to encourage these kinds of critical thoughts and trying to write more about it and get people to step back and see where we are. And I think I'll end with that. See if anybody wants to.
In terms of shifting energy off of fossil fuels onto something else, what are the biggest ways we can do that?
So one thing I guess I learned in my personal experience is that if you're seeing an energy decline in fossil fuels at the level of a few percent per year, let's say, that, you know, we've hit peak oil, we're past the peak and we're kind of coming down, whether it's due to resource limitations or, you know, the introduction of renewables or whatever. It's hard to replace a few percent per year at this scale by really almost any technology. The build out just has to be massive, which, by the way, takes a lot of energy to do, which, you know, in the short term makes your problem even tougher. I know Tim has thought about this issue a lot. And so meanwhile, what I learned from my personal experience is that you can shave 75% of your energy like that. It's in your head. It's what you expect. Humans didn't evolve with HVAC. And it turns out we're built to be able to withstand, you know, a temperature range that's larger than what we normally keep in our interior spaces. It turns out we've also made sweaters, you know, so in the winter you could have a cool space and just wear more clothes. There are a lot of things like that that are just really easy. It's kind of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. You've been wearing the shoes all along, you just needed to click them. And so you can have huge reductions and huge impact through reduction. And so that tends to be my focus rather than what technology are we going to use. It's more, wait a minute, why are we using energy this way? What do we really need it for? And that's where the big gains are. Yeah.
I know it's a big if, but if fusion power became viable, how would that change your scenario?
Yeah, good question. So as a physicist, you know, I've been fond of the fusion idea. And I think part of that, and I'll just be honest, is that when you understand a complex technology, you have an affinity for it because it's special and you understand it and other people might not. And I recognize that in myself and that was part of the appeal. When I think of fusion now, what does it do? It produces electricity if you had an operational fusion plant. It's not any better for transportation than, say, solar or wind, because it's another source of electricity. It turns out we're not short on ways to make electricity. Okay. The main appeal of fusion is that the deuterium is everywhere, right? You can have billions of years of deuterium. You also have billions of years of solar photons. It's also a fusion plant that didn't cost us anything and it runs without maintenance. When I think of fusion, and it's really difficult, long trajectory, and you know, always 50 years away, has been that for 50 years. I recognize it now as the most sophisticated Rube Goldberg way to boil water to make steam that we could possibly concoct. And why are we working that hard to do that? By the way, tritium you can't find anywhere naturally. and you do have some radioactive hardening of the containment vessel, and you need, a staff of 20 PhD physicists to run the thing. I don't know. It just seems like, really, do we have to do that? Compared to solar, I'm still fond of solar, and I've got a lot of personal experience with it, and just think that, I dismantled the system in San Diego when I moved out of there and moved to Swim, and I haven't installed a new thing yet, but I basically used to be able to say that I've got solar and batteries working right now on my garage. And I'm not sure what fusion gives you that solar plus batteries doesn't.
Isn't it the scale, potential scale?
Well, so be careful about the scale, because if you were to utilize a scale that's, comparable to the solar potential, you've got the thermodynamic problem when you're boiling your oceans. So you can't just dial it up arbitrarily. And so be careful. And also, what are we using our energy to do? So far, you've seen the ecological harms. I'm not sure the goal should be maintaining 18 terawatts.
I was thinking the same thing. I drive an electric car, and for years, I thought that was, the best thing since sliced bread. But as I've understood what it takes to provide energy for the car, and all the minerals that went into the battery to create the car, it has a fairly big battery. I really become much less thinking I did a great thing by going that way. And I've been trying to look at a couple of models that are looking pretty good. They tell me that if I drive the car for, say, 35,000 miles, 55,000 kilometers, that I should be, after that, getting ahead. And yet the thing that I really don't understand with it is the limits on the resources, because my car's got maybe 10 pounds of cobalt in it, and it's a low cobalt battery. We don't produce a single pound of cobalt anywhere in North America. We have some people that want to do it, but they're not doing it. And it takes 15 years to get a mine approved in most jurisdictions in North America. So I kind of now drive my car a lot less. I've always ridden a bike. And I'm not near as smug about the fact that I'm driving an electric car.
It's complicated. I mean, it really is, there's a lot to it, and a lot of it is completely out of sight. And so we don't experience firsthand what the costs are on the ecological side. They're just completely hidden from us.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know. I sympathize with you. It's not obvious. And I did calculations at one point of if we needed to develop battery storage for a full scale renewable energy, wind and solar installation, and I just did this for the US. The battery that the US would need, I did the lead acid case because that's the cheapest batteries that we had at the time. But the same is true for lithium, that we don't have enough proven reserves in the world to build that battery, that lead acid battery or lithium battery. And so there's that, and the price would, I caution against even using dollars to make sense, but it'd be prohibitive.
Yeah.
And so, but the real fact is that we don't even know that we have that much material. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in your hockey stick collection. Surely the fact that population is no longer exponential is a sign for optimism.
Sure.
It's all these uppity women refusing to have babies anymore.
So certainly, we can expect population to halt its upward progress. And the sort of optimistic thing is that S-curve. Now, to the extent that that population is using non-renewable resources, that itself spells trouble. We can't do that even. We can't level out and use non-renewable resources. And by the way, just because renewable energy has the word renewable in it, doesn't mean that it's a renewable technology. It uses a renewable flow of energy, but generally using non-renewable resources. So yeah, the one way or another, nature is going to work this out. Has no choice, and that likely means population reduction. And I just hope that it's not chaotic, right? And that means we need to think about these things ahead of time and understand what's coming and get in front of it and accept things, go through all those stages of grief. And I get it that I've had years to do this, and maybe some of you are kind of blindsided by this, but I've gone through them, the anger and the denial and all that. But at some point you accept that, okay, the future is not this, the world that we have lived in is not at all a good model for the future. It can't be a good model for the future. And the future is going to look radically different than what we're used to, in a way that isn't Jetsons necessarily. It might be more Flintstones than Jetsons. We have to understand that, but make the best of it. And I think we can do things to make that more pleasant. And let's see, there was some other thought rattling around there connected to this. Oh, well, lost it. Yeah.
I want to start with the comment. I love the fact, I was reflecting on the innovation and the technology, and you get really line where you talk about, there's limits to it, and I got that. And I just love the irony that there's a guy that invented a laser that could shine on the moon and measure the difference in 1 millimeter. Like, humans are incredibly innovative, like incredibly talented.
Yeah, I'm in awe of those things too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I was going to go with, so you showed sort of the dollar value for the Earth's ecosystems, which is orders of magnitude greater than like the Costanza number that the ecological economists have put on, which is conveniently similar to the GDP of the planet,
Yeah,
right? It's just kind of,
how could it not be?
yeah, right. And so what do you, there's lots of other kind of groups of people out there that are sort of concerned about similar things, and you have a very profound way of arriving at the limits here. Do you think there's anything to the ecological economists or any of these other groups? Or where do you see hope? I always do similar writings, and I always think, how do I end this? Where's the hope at the end?
Yeah, and I mean that opens up so many avenues for me. And the first thing I'll say is that almost every documentary that nature documentary these days has the same woeful tale, but at the last 10 minutes. But it's not too late. We have hope, and here are all these good things that are happening. And I actually think that diffuses the concern, and it unburdens the viewer, so they can walk away and think, good, all right, things are all right. I don't have to worry about it. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. The need to provide that hope. I'm not, as you can see,
It's like
one of those people.
It's like every IPCC report. The last few decades, they would say, "Oh, as long as we do it this year, it's okay." And
right.
The next 5 years later, it's well, we just have negative emissions technology. So it's
right. It gets weird.
Yeah.
Ecological economics, I'm a huge fan of, in the sense that so I think every field, basically everything we teach in any school at whatever level, every subject should start with the question of how do we make sure as we progress through this field of thinking that we're not violating biophysical limits. How do we make sure that we're not causing a net harm to the thing that's most precious to us, which is our ecosystem health? And so ecological economics does start with that question, and it's one of the only fields besides ecology itself that might. But even ecology has its blind spots. I mean, ecology doesn't even consider humans as part of ecologies, but it's the most important element in almost every ecology in the planet. And so there's this separation. And I guess at some level, I concluded that a lot of this is what I would call human exceptionalism, that we've made a dividing line between the rest of nature and humans. And we think that we don't obey the same rules, we don't have to, and we control nature. And that is a failure mindset. That leads to failure. But it's very self-flattering, so we like it. I think that we have superpowers. So even fields like ecology maintain that division between humans. Oh, we can't touch human systems. That's the economist's domain or whatever. So ecological economics, I think, is great that it's trying to at least acknowledge this basis, this foundation. Yeah.
Great presentation, Tom. Thanks very much. I'm wondering, I think you've given a really good assessment here of what you refer to as the outer scale, the limits of the outer scale. And that makes me reflect a lot of where I've spent my own efforts is to try to characterize what I would call the inner scale. So, and it seems like for the outer scale, the sort of big picture, time and space, physics frame of reference is the appropriate tool. But I wonder if you have any reflections on how do we get at that inner scale? Because with the human tendency for time discounting, a lot of these outer scale limits, although to some degree incontrovertible, are still distant enough that it doesn't really bite. And I wonder what you think, if physics is the appropriate tool for that, where do we go? How do we approach this problem of characterizing what we can do in the shorter term and what the kind of option space available to us really is?
Yeah, I don't know. I get stuck on that same thing because you're right. Most people are not going to look at the 1,000-year time horizon and make their decisions on that basis. And so, I don't know if I can say anything more than that's unfortunate. We are the first species on this planet capable of making such a negative impact. And if what you say is going to end up being the limiting factor that we as individuals can't and collectively can't really prioritize long-term, then it's unfortunate. It's basically evolution saying, you know what, maybe there is a limit to intelligence. Maybe that as an adaptive strategy, you can go too far. Because why? I think of it this way. The first species on this planet capable of doing what we have done, accessing the fossil fuels, for instance, will do it. And why would evolution skip a few steps and evolve a species wise enough not to do that? It doesn't work like that. Evolution is incremental. And so you're going to hit this first species who could do it, and then, oops, we shouldn't have. So I don't know. It's a tough question. I guess I kind of think that here's where I do have hope, and I also remember the other thing that's rattling around. My hope in the future stems from two things. One is the distant past, where humans did have ways to live on this planet that were basically sustainable for millions of years. It doesn't mean that that's the only way that we can live sustainably for millions of years. It's a proof of concept that it can happen. We know that our current mode is not one of those ways, so we need something different. But at least there's some proof of concept that there are ways to live. And those people, by the way, did laugh. So, it wasn't just misery. They had meaning and fulfillment in life. So the other piece of hope for me is that a child born into the world sees that world as normal, no matter what that world looks like. And so we're the ones burdened with this anomalous sense of what the world is right now.
Yeah.
But the child 1,000 years from now will have no concept of that and will get along just fine with whatever the world looks like at that point. And so I'm not one of these people who thinks humans are driving themselves to extinction. I think we're driving our civilization to extinction, right? That's the thing that can't survive. That's the thing that wasn't evolved and tested over long periods of time to work. It doesn't. And so, but what does that mean? Civilization is kind of a loaded term. What elements could we preserve in the long term? I think we need to use our innovation to think about that and think about what really is biophysically possible for the long term. I think so partly, I think the answer to your question, Tim, is that we're not going to likely develop mindsets that somehow preserve our civilization as we know it by suddenly thinking long term. I think if we did successfully think long term, we'd realize that this is not the right answer. We'd do something completely different. Now, we're going to do something completely different no matter what happens. And, you know, I've heard the statement that a lot of indigenous people who developed what we would now see as sustainable ways of living only did so after they had ruined their own environments. And they said, oh, we can't live like that. We have to adapt to this new style that is sustainable. And so sustainability is enforced upon us at some level. And long-term thinking is enforced upon us. And so I think, you know, that's likely the way it really goes.
Yeah, I think that's very true. There's some real classic cases of large plant-eating animals in Australia, and they know exactly when they died, and it was when the Maori came, and within a few generations they got them all. So we've done it, humans have done it, and it doesn't matter which humans, they've done it all around the world. I just had one question about the idea of making it micro, and that was that when I started looking at my household carbon footprint, and I got focused on carbon, which may not be the best way of looking at it, but yeah, I had to go to quite a bit of research. I had to, you know, find out from BC Hydro that if I bought this many kilowatts of energy, what does that mean in terms of output and so on. And I really enjoyed it after a while. I was using natural gas, I was using gas in my car, and I was using BC Hydro, which are the only hydro people we can buy it from up here. And I got to the point where I could say, hey, I understand that number. My house puts out, you know, 2.5 tons of CO2 every year. Now puts out about 1.7. I'm gonna cut it down again by putting in a heat pump water tank. But that's where it kind of ends. I don't have really much of an idea how I would compare with the average household. And I think one tool that could really be good for a school to develop would be a really easy carbon calculator for a household or a group of people or a town or a village. And I think it would help create some relevance with some of the numbers, because a lot of my friends have absolutely no clue what I'm talking about. I say, hey, I had a pretty good year. Oh, I cut down on this number again, and like, what's he talking about? You know?
No, I mean, I agree. It can be a nice adventure, you know, personal journey that you go through to sort of assess your own footprint and work on it. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. I would really love to see energy labels. We have food labels. I'd like to see, you know, energy and carbon labels and other things. Like, here's a product. What had to happen for this to land on the shelf. If I buy a bird feeder, I want to know how many birds had to die to make this bird feeder. And I'm serious about that, because all these things we do have this ecological impact that's hidden from us, and we don't even know. Is it 0.1 birds or 10? What's the scale? At one point, I did a crude calculation. I need to revisit it and see if it's because I did it while I was out splitting logs, so in my head, but without all the data. But it's something like for every $100 you spend, roughly a kilogram of biomass was sacrificed. Some living matter was destroyed. And so, that adds up. But I'd like to see more accountability and more recognition, because I think people aren't mean-spirited. They don't know. They're just removed from all of the costs and isolated from the costs. I think if you lived in the country and did your own self-sufficiency thing, you would see the impacts of all your choices. And we don't. They're just completely removed. And so we think they're free. It's the impression we get. The graphs show otherwise. It's devastating cost.
But the problem is we only have the market, or we have formal government, which is super short-sighted. And I'm not a globalist per se, but who is interested enough to, help us along to make the changes that we need to do?
Yeah,
You have to find a home, or we have to find a home for some of these ideas.
it's a huge challenge, and the way I phrase it for myself is, are we capable as a species of leaving goodies on the shelf within easy reach, generation after generation, in global cooperation? Because that's what it takes. We have the power to access everything, and we shouldn't. And so, can we exercise self-restraint? My wife actually gets really annoyed at me. I have this chocolate bar. I get a big Trader Joe's chocolate bar, and I have 1 square per night. And so the thing lasts 40 days. And she's like, just eat it. She can't actually eat the chocolate, so I'm safe. But can we leave that thing? And I'm still consuming it. I'm not doing that sustainably. But can we leave the goodies on the shelf, generation after generation, within easy reach, with global cooperation? We have no structure for that. And I'm not sure that we can meet that challenge. Democracy is the best form of government until, as Winston Churchill said, you spend 5 minutes with the average voter. But it's got a flaw in this case, because democracy tends to satisfy people's immediate needs. And
we're not killing whales anymore.
Yeah, there are very few to kill.
Not directly.
Well, Japan, some countries still are.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, there are some areas where public awareness has really helped, but I guarantee you, if whales were as important to us as fossil fuels are, or chlorofluorocarbons, for instance, yeah, we can ban those because we can have substitutes. But when it really comes down to our daily expectations, people didn't suffer greatly when whales went away. They didn't have to give up a lot. It's a lot harder to give up, if you're going to have a cold house. That's a bigger stretch. That's something I'm not sure people are up for.
I think this is a really critical point, and it comes back to the work of people like Eleanor Ostrom, who look at commons management and the aspects of social organization that have to be in place to achieve this sort of thing. And it can be done, and in many cases, small-scale societies do this. They do it effectively. They've done it for generations, particularly, tribal societies are very good at doing this.
Right.
But her research indicates that you need certain elements that are just extremely difficult to achieve in the context of a globalized, highly interconnected, highly unequal society. You need strong group identity, you need clarity and accountability, you need rules for swift and unequivocal arbitration of issues. And in the context of a global system dominated by nation states and corporations, it's just not the social structure that allows for these elements. So it gets back to your point that that this change will come, but it will come via a change in circumstances. I think we're still kind of stuck in this fallacy of top-down engineering, of engineering the system towards a future end. And in fact, that's not how societies change. They change organically in response to circumstances.
So would you agree that capitalism itself isn't compatible with the future of our planet?
I would
It
say
seems
so.
like a lot of like extraction, consumerism, all the things we're talking about brings back capitalism.
Yeah, I would say capitalism is incompatible because it prioritizes the exact wrong things. You need a system that prioritizes ecosystem health.
It seems to me that there's a flaw in focusing on the individual behaviors of consumers, where it seems like you need to focus upstream, what is being produced.
Yes and no, but realize that oil companies wouldn't exist if people didn't demand the products. And so, and forest research, I saw, you're in forest land too. I saw a bumper sticker that I thought was great. If you don't like loggers, try using plastic toilet paper. And it really gets at the fact that loggers aren't just evil people going out because they love to cut down trees. There's a demand for those things. And so the demand, it's not 100% one or the other, but you got to understand that we create the demand. Yeah, question.
It's a content question. I'm an engineering student, and I thought that your story about moving from astrophysics into sustainability of the sort really spoke to me, as I used to aspire to work at SpaceX. And now I'm here. And I think building off your points that engineers often serve to enable capital, kind of it's their function. I was wondering if in your research group you work with any engineers, and what you see that the role of engineering towards this Holtz model of fossil fuel research.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do work with engineers, and there are some engineers in this Planetary Limits academic network, and they're often very different sorts of people, because I think a lot of engineers are great problem solvers, and they just can't wait for you to give them a problem, and they're going to go work it out, and they're going to be clever about it and impressive, but never stepping back to ask, what does this actually do? What's the long-term implication of this thing? It's just sort of, don't bother me with that. I've got a problem to solve, which I get, because I'm that way too. I'm basically an engineer. I build stuff. I know exactly how that mindset is. But the engineers in this Planetary Limits academic network tend to ask those bigger questions and think about the ethical side of what engineering is doing and what it's really serving, who it's really serving. And in the end, maybe not our own best self-interest. It's not long-term.
Can I throw something in here? Because I just want to let you know, we have an industrial ecology program on campus, which is centered around engineering. It starts in engineering, it's organized in engineering, it's got others involved as well. And it starts with basically, how does everyone live sustainably on a planet?
Mhm.
Bringing in the many dimensions that we've got. So
Great.
There's room for engineers.
What's your name? Like the
Industrial ecology.
Those two words next to each other almost.
I know.
Whoa, okay.
But it's a study of it's ecology of industrial society.
You talked a bit about how capitalism affects energy usage and how further colonizing places, whether it's Mount Everest or elsewhere, the energy that would take to do so. What role do you feel like decolonization plays in potentially reducing energy usage?
it could play a huge role in that. That's part of what makes it out of sight, out of mind. It's a problem over there for me to have this thing here. And you don't see the costs. I think the smaller scale things are, the more likely you know what the costs are. If it's not anonymous, if it's, so that definitely goes against kind of a globalized platform. And I think that's probably going to be a natural evolution into that, because some of the techniques and some of the tools that we've used to perfect this global colonization won't be available anymore. And so you're going to have more isolated, smaller dynamics.
So we're about out of time for the room. So if there's one final question, we can take that and then wrap up, or no? Okay. Well, thanks very much, Tom.